the microphone up there. So just go ahead and talk, we're like, just like in a room.
Okay,
So,
so this thing doesn't work.
it's not working, no.
No worries, I'm a loud person, so, if, you folks online, if you can give me a thumbs up that the volume is okay and that you can hear what I'm saying, I guess, we'll proceed.
And they can actually ask questions, so you'll hear them.
Excellent. For those of you that aren't here in the room, you're probably not able to see the fact that I have a boot on my left foot, and I'm hobbling around and I'm on crutches and all that fun stuff. And so if anybody wants to know how I do it, I charge $10 to tell the story now, because it's been a while and I've told it a lots of different times. But I did break my tibia and distal fibula. And so for those of you that haven't done that before, I had a non-weight bearing injury. I would not recommend it. It is not a fun recovery process. So that is my ankle, and that's all the hardware they put in there to hold it back together. And so I am Michael Raspberry, and I'm the director of environmental programs at UA Safe State. So most of you are probably very familiar with Tom and Matt and Randy and the UA Safe State OSHA consultation program group. Our environmental program started up in the 80s, and we took on kind of developing the asbestos training program whenever the AHERA regulations for asbestos were rolled out. And then from there, we kind of branched off, and now I manage 7 federally grant-funded programs. And then we also do some fee-based services. We do some training and do some site visits where we go and do something similar to what the consultation group does, where we can go out and do a third-party review of a facility and look at their environmental program and look at environmental aspects and to see if there are any gaps in permitting or plans or procedures. And as part of those activities, one of the things that I've identified multiple times, and I started building this presentation last year, as part of our environmental review, we always ask to see your chemical inventory. Let's look at your chemical inventory, and let's look at your safety data sheets, and let's kind of start understanding, what sort of chemicals you're managing, and let's make sure that you're doing everything you're supposed to do as part of that management. And what I've identified is that this is an area of weakness at a lot of plants and a lot of sites, is that typically they could not produce an up-to-date, accurate chemical inventory that included things like usage data. How much are you using annually? How much is on site at any given time? Those data just weren't being tracked very well, and it causes a lot of issues with environmental reporting. So that's one of the things that I'm going to kind of talk about today. Here's sort of the path that I'm going to take, just kind of introduce the HAZCOM standard and introduce chemical inventory management up front, and then get into some common areas of non-compliance with these issues. And then finally, I'm going to close with some environmental reporting areas that we have found that some facilities just aren't doing, and it's sometimes because they just don't have the data that's needed to determine whether or not you need to be reporting. So introduction to hazard communication and the recent updates to the standard. So if you aren't aware, the HAZCOM standard was updated back in July. It became effective. And so there are a lot of new areas that you need to be familiar with regards to the HAZCOM standard. And so HCS 2024, that's what we're under now. It's not 2012 anymore. And it's found in 29 CFR 1910.1200. And those are the different appendices that are part of that HAZCOM standard. So this final rule that was passed basically brings the HAZCOM standard up to date with the 7th revision of the GHS, the Globally Harmonized System. And so it has brought it up to, you know, that seventh revision to align more closely with some of our trading partners like Canada and places in Europe. And so that this update has been occurring for a while. This took effect on July 19th, 2024. And does anyone know what revision of GHS we're already up to now? It's not the seventh revision. It's not the most current one. And so GHS, they actually revise that on a 2-year cycle. So every 2 years, they go in and try to make updates to the globally harmonized system. We're actually up to the 10th revision now. So OSHA's already behind the times on GHS, but that's just the way it is. You know, they update on a regular cycle and OSHA doesn't. It takes kind of a big step before any of the OSHA standards get updated. But anyway, so yeah, that's up to the 10th revision now, but the OSHA HCS standard is revised in accordance with the 7th revision. And so now what I want to do is just kind of go through some of the areas that have been updated. Now, I'm not going to go into this in great detail. This is just going to be kind of a broad level review of some of the updates to the standard. There are revised and new physical hazard classes and categories, things like desensitized explosives. Flammable gases have new subcategories where they've kind of moved pyrophoric and unstable gases. Aerosols, which used to be under the flammable aerosols section, is now, you know, its own classification system. And they've added non-flammable aerosols just to kind of cover those unique products. And then chemicals under pressure, just a couple of examples of some of the physical hazard classes and categories that have been revised as part of this. And so along with that, the next thing that's going to be coming are going to be things like updated precautionary statements, updated labels, updated SDSs. And so it's going to cause a lot of changes because of these hazard class and category updates. So those are going to be things that through the next couple of years, you're going to see some changes and you're going to need to make updates in your system. There are also a lot of updated definitions and a lot of new definitions. And so one of the things that if I ever do any type of training, I always recommend that, for one, you read the standards and you know the standards. And for two, you make sure you read the definitions, because regulatory definitions are not necessarily common sense definitions. And a lot of times you have to understand what they mean from a regulatory context, and if you want to really understand what you need to be doing at your site or your facility. So those definitions are crucial and they're very important to have a look at. Also, if you have trade secrets that you are dealing with on any of your products and SDS sheets, they've changed the rule on trade secrets to where you have to have more precise concentration ranges. And here on the slide, you can see the letters A through M. And so those are the concentration ranges that are now going to need to be provided on safety data sheets for any of your trade secret information or proprietary information. As I stated earlier, you know, even with just the changes to the hazard classes and the categories, you're going to have updated labels. But one major change happened with small container labeling, and specifically for ampules and vials, things that are down in the 3 milliliter to 100 milliliter range. In those circumstances, they're allowing for more abbreviated labels, as long as you provide the larger label in the outer packaging box or within the SDS, or you're providing that larger label in some other fashion. But you can put an abbreviated label on those smaller containers. Here's the implementation timeline for this. And so the HCS standard went effective July 19th, 2024. So the HAZCOM standard update is in law now. And the substance labels and SDS sheets have to be updated to the new standard by January 19th, 2026. So there's a little bit of time for manufacturers and distributors to update the labels and SDSs. And then mixture labels and SDSs have to be updated by July 19th, 2027. So there's even more of a timeline on mixtures. Now, OSHA has done a great job of providing this side-by-side comparison from HCS 2012 to HCS 2024. And you can go to the link that I provided up there, and there's a PDF, and it's got a good kind of side-by-side comparison of what has changed within the standard. And so for me, like if you're familiar with the standard, then it's a good idea to go to these side-by-side comparisons so you can identify what changed. If you're not very familiar with the standard, you just need to go to the standard and read it from the start. Now, this is not a comprehensive review. This side-by-side comparison isn't. So what I also recommend is that you go to this red line and strikeout document that's provided at that rulemaking website that's provided there. And in that document, you're actually going to get into the appendices, and you're going to get a much broader understanding of what all changed. And it's basically all striked out like they tracked the changes in it. And that's where you'll get the deepest understanding of what has effectively changed in this thing. And so this is a very important document for you to go check out if you're responsible for HAZCOM at your site. And you need more detailed information on this stuff because it gets into those appendices and really spells out what has changed in the updated standard. All right, so that's kind of my brief overview summary of kind of updates to the standard. It's really important you understand those, and especially if you have a HAZCOM program at your site that you're implementing. And so what is HAZCOM in a nutshell for those that may not be familiar with HAZCOM? And so in a nutshell, there are a few things that you have to do. You have to have a written program. You have to have a written document that spells out how you're communicating hazards at your facility. You have to have a chemical inventory. You have to manage your chemicals at your site and have an inventory of those chemicals. You need to make sure that you are using proper labeling at your facility, that you have safety data sheets that are available and accessible to employees at the site, and then that you're conducting training, because we're going to talk about something in a moment called the right to understand. The employees have that right to understand, and that's where employee training comes into effect. And so let's start with just the basic kind of a written hazard communication program. And so you need to have a written plan, and at a minimum, that written plan needs to have, kind of what your chemical inventory management system is. What kind of container labels are you using at your site? Your SDS and right to know access. How are you providing those SDS for employees at the site? And then also workplace training programs. You need to spell out what all is going to be covered in your workplace training. How often are you doing training? Now, you could have a multi-employer workplace, and often facilities these days do have that. And so if you have a multi-employer workplace, you need to be sure to identify all the employers who have an employee working on site. And that's your contractors, any staffing agency, any kind of third party that's working at your facility. You need to understand who those individuals are and to make sure that there are methods used to provide on-site access to SDS for those employees. You need to make sure that you have appropriate methods used to inform of any precautionary measures you're using at the site. Methods used to inform of what labeling systems you're using at the site to make sure that those third-party employers understand the types of chemical hazards at your facility and that they have access to appropriate information on those hazards. So chemical inventory, and this is kind of, again, this is the main area that that I really am wanting to kind of get the word out on, because I see this as being a deficiency that I have observed at multiple workplaces over the last few years. And I feel like that this is an area where it's putting facilities into jeopardy of being out of compliance with a lot of different regulations, because they don't have a good understanding or an up-to-date inventory identifying chemical hazards at their site. And you can't communicate the hazards if you don't know what you have. And so it's crucial that you have a system in place that you're collecting all this information. And also, it's important that you're working outside of just the EHS group or the health and safety team. There are many individuals at a facility that needs to be working on keeping an up-to-date chemical inventory management system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. It must be kept up to date, and you need to include all your chemical products with required SDSs. Now, here are a few best practices that I typically will talk to companies about. One is assign a responsible person or a team that is that's going to be working on your chemical inventory management, because you're not only going to have your EHS folks involved, you're also going to have your procurement folks involved. Who's ordering the chemicals? You're also going to have all your different divisions at a plant site that's going to be working on that, like your maintenance shop. They're going to order certain chemicals. And I always tell a horror story. If you don't have a tracking system for ordering chemicals in place, you need to have one. There needs to be a person that all the chemicals you order goes through for evaluation, because there could be Toxic Substances Control Act regulations that apply to them. There could be reporting things that apply to them. And so you need to make sure that you're running any sort of chemical orders through a division that has ultimate responsibility on okaying that and making sure it gets added to an inventory. I worked at a site where maintenance personnel had ordered a lot of a brake cleaner. It was a solvent, and ordered boxes and boxes of it. Didn't run that through the health and safety team, didn't run that through the environmental person. They just started using this. It was 100% per brake cleaner, so it was a solvent, and they were basically disposing of all the disposed rags and things like that in with their used oil. And so is that used oil now? It's not. It's hazardous waste. And this was a very small quantity generator, and they generated enough of this waste to be a large quantity generator, which is a very different thing. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of excess costs, and it cost them a lot of money to dispose of all this product that had piled up at their facility that their third-party vendor wouldn't pick up because it was hazardous waste that they were not permitted to handle. So it's really crucial to have a system in place to make sure that you're monitoring this. Conduct a thorough chemical inventory. And you need to do this on occasion where you walk around, you go to the different areas of the plant, and you're documenting. You have somebody that's documenting what all do we have at this place, and making sure that you have an inventory management system where you're checking that on occasion. Establishing a centralized inventory system is a good idea. Having a single place where all your chemical inventory management documents show up. Basically having that approval process in place I just mentioned. Coordinating with all your departments like I just talked about. A lot of facilities now are using a barcoding system, which I think is great and is a very effective system to kind of look at for managing chemicals. And even when you use chemicals, if you've got a chemical closet out on the floor, you can go up there and scan that barcode when you're taking products out of it and basically monitor who got this and what area of my facility is using this. That's a good way to kind of monitor usage of products. And also making sure that you don't order too much of something. Your person in procurement may say, hey, we're getting a good deal on this. Let me order 4 cases of this stuff. And then you can't use but about 2 of those cases before it expires. And then guess what? Then you gotta dispose of hazmat that you haven't used. You got expired chemicals on the closet. And so you got excess management costs and excess costs to dispose of something you didn't even use. So there's a lot of ways this applies. Ensuring accessibility of SDS and then regularly reviewing and updating the inventory. I say at least quarterly, but you can do this biannually, but you need to have some sort of a procedure in place. Labeling. And so labeling, so your product labeling requirements have been updated because of HCS 2024. And so you're going to need to evaluate your products to make sure you don't have anything that has changed, because you're going to have to update labels on those products. Then your workplace labels must not be defaced or removed unless immediately replaced. They must be legible and prominently displayed, and must be in English at a minimum. There's a lot more label characteristics that I'm not going over here. Here are the 6 main elements of your HCS GHS labels. And so you've got a product chemical identifier, a signal word, danger or warning, your pictograms, your hazard statements, cautionary statements like prevention, response, storage, disposal, and then your supplier identifier, so who's supplying the product. So this is kind of a typical GHS label. Here are some of the labeling updates of those new hazard classes that have changed. Pictograms that are going to be updated for those specific hazards that have been updated, those hazard classes and categories. Revised precautionary statements from that, and then key changes to the application of labels on small containers, and then trade secret considerations. And again, that's just another example of those GHS labels, what a label looks like. You can use other systems still, and so if you're using kind of your NFPA diamonds or your HMIS labels, you can do that as long as they're consistent with the HAZCOM standard. But mainly what you have to do is you have to make sure that you're employing a training program where you train employees on the use of those labels. And then also, if you're a multi-employer workplace, you need to make sure that they understand and are trained on those labeling systems. And those labeling systems just have to meet the HCS standard requirements. So many other elements to labeling not discussed here, but labels are crucial, and this is a huge area of non-compliance with the HAZCOM standard. All right, SDS, so supplied by the manufacturer, distributor, or importer. You must have on hand for each hazardous chemical, must be accessible to all affected employees, and there's a standard 16-section format for SDS. And so that must be accessible to all affected employees. That's one that I like to talk about. So what does that mean for it to be readily accessible? Anybody in the room, like what does readily accessible mean?
It has to be available and people have to know where it's available.
Right. And so
anytime they're there, anytime they need it.
Yeah, at any time they need it. So if there's a spill, if there's a leak, if somebody has been exposed, they need to be able to get a hold of those SDS. And so, you could keep them in a binder. There still are facilities that do that. You got the big SDS binder that's got SDS from as far back as SDS Go in there. A lot of times those aren't updated regularly. That's the problem with them. And so if you have those big binders like that, you need to make sure that you have some system in place where you're going and you're updating those. Make sure that that's documented in your HAZCOM. It should be in your written plan. What are you doing to make sure that you've updated your SDS binders and the SDS in those workplace areas? You can also have them on in computer systems, and the problem that I've seen with that is sometimes they require passwords and things like that. You can't have it where an employee has to put in a password that they could forget. That's not immediate access. That's not immediately accessible. Also, what happens if you have a power outage? What other ways are you using to have those SDS where they're immediately available and accessible for employees. Those are all the things you have to think about with regards to accessibility of those SDS. You may want to designate a person that's responsible, and again, it's typically, like a safety supervisor or a EHS coordinator, or somebody at a site needs to be responsible for making sure that your SDS are being updated. A lot of plants that we've worked at, will have out-of-date SDS. They don't have the most accurate information, or they could have multiple SDS through time that are for the same product. And so they could have an updated version. They may have an older version. They've kind of got them all together. And so you need to have a person that's making sure that those SDS are being managed appropriately. And then finally, just the employee training. So, do your employees know what this is? It's important that they do. If you have things like compressed gases at your site, the gas cylinder, so gas is under pressure. They need to know why that's hazardous. What does that mean to them? And the training part of it is crucial, and it's the main part of, kind of the HAZCOM standard. It's hazard communication. You want to communicate with your employees all these hazardous chemicals are at the site, how it has an impact on them and on the workplace. And the HAZCOM standard came from it was the right to know. And so what does right to know mean? The right to know standard is just kind of an awareness, right? They just had to be aware of chemicals and chemical hazards, but that has been updated to the right to understand. And so now right to understand is not just awareness. The right to understand, they need to know some details on these chemical hazards. They need to understand what PPE do I need if something has happened, if somebody is exposed, if there's a spill, if there's an emergency situation. They have the right to understand these details. And so the right to understand aspect of this is crucial, and that all comes out in the way that you train your employees. And so you need to make sure that your training objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. This is just the SMART system. There's tons of different training systems that you can do, but you need to have goals that you set. You need to make sure that you're measuring how effective this training is. Do the people actually get what you're saying? Or do they forget about it as soon as they leave? How are you going to measure that? How are you going to test that? Do you have some sort of an assessment process in place where they can assess the training? And then the other thing I say about training, and this is a huge, huge gap that I see often. If you do not document the training, did it happen? It did not happen. And I see so many facilities that are not documenting the training that occurred. And that's the date it occurred. What was the description and scope of the training? Who were the attendees? You need to make sure that you're documenting that and keeping it in a logbook, and you need to file that away in your HAZCOM plan. So that seems easy enough, right? The HAZCOM in a nutshell. So that's just kind of my brief little blow through. Now there's a lot of more detailed information with regards to HAZCOM. This is just intended to be kind of a quick run through. And so that seems like a very straightforward program, right? Pretty easy to comply. Well, here's the FY25 top 10 most cited standards from OSHA, and number 2 is what? Hazard communication, 3,227 violations in 2023. Well, that must have been just a weird year, right? So 2023 was a weird year for HAZCOM. Well, here's the last 5 years for the HAZCOM standard where it's ranked, and it typically comes in at number 2. And so non-compliance with HAZCOM is a very typical violation that is found by OSHA. Facilities are out of compliance with this standard on a regular basis. And so here are some of the common non-compliance issues. Failure to develop and maintain a written program. You go into a site Where's your HAZCOM plan? I don't know. Or here it is, and the last time it was updated was 2017 or something like that. You know, nobody's looked at it in years. One of the reasons for things like that, I think, a lot of times staff turnover happens and there's not succession planning. And so the person that comes in to run that job after somebody left that's been there for 15 or 20 years, they don't know where any of their plans, procedures are, documents are. They really, a lot of times, it's a newbie that maybe doesn't have a lot of experience. And so they may not even know they need to be doing that. Because they've got a lot of other things on their mind. It's complicated at a site. There's lots of different environmental and health and safety standards that you have to comply with. Failure to update and manage a list of hazardous chemicals. That's that hazardous chemical inventory. Failure to ensure that each container of hazardous chemicals is labeled or labeling. Failure to have safety data sheet for each hazardous chemical. So each one of these are part of what's supposed to be in that written HAZCOM plan. We're basically going through that HAZCOM in a nutshell list. Well, so that's kind of the health and safety part of it. But also you got the EPA that requires that organizations report on the types and quantities of chemicals that are present at your facility. And so if you're out of compliance with HAZCOM and you don't have an accurate chemical inventory, well, guess what? It's quite likely that you're out of compliance with the Environmental Protection Agency or the State of Alabama Department of Environmental Management, because there are other chemical reporting standards that you have to follow outside of just the HAZCOM standard and all the OSHA standards. And so, for example, just a quick run through, this is the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act from 1980. This is called Superfund. So this act established the Superfund, which is a trust fund to clean up contaminated sites. And it basically established a framework to hold facilities and organizations liable for the cleanup of these contaminated properties and contaminated sites. And so there are grants that are available to clean up, contaminated properties. And also Superfund involved a lot of community involvement. So it's not just the facility now. Now it's the facility plus all your neighbors, all the community that lives around your facility. Superfund was amended and in 1986, and it's the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, or SARA. And when SARA was passed, basically the Community Right to Know program was established. And so that's where the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act regulations come from. And so it's called EPCRA. And so the Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act has a lot of chemical reporting requirements that the general public can have access to. And we're going to go into a couple of the reporting programs just from this EPCRA program. There are many others, but we'll talk about these two. And so EPCRA is basically where the federal government required for state emergency response committees and state emergency planning committees to establish LEPCs, or local emergency planning committees, to be established. And so that's where all your emergency management agencies, your county emergency management agencies come from. Those are all your LEPCs that became established because of this emergency planning stuff. And then there's a lot of emergency release notifications, hazardous chemical storage and reporting requirements, and then toxic release inventory requirements that come out of these EPCRA rules. And so one I want to talk about is the Hazardous Chemical Inventory Tier 2 report. And so this comes from SARA 311 and 312. And basically, this covers any facility that has chemicals that have SDS required under OSHA. So if you've got any chemical at your site that has an SDS, then it could be a covered facility for Tier 2 reporting, for this hazardous chemical inventory reporting. Now, this Tier 2 report is intended to protect these folks. The tier 2 report is typically intended to protect first responders and anybody that's responding to an emergency at your site. And so there are certain thresholds of those hazardous chemicals that throw you into having to submit tier 2 reports. Here are the thresholds. So for most chemicals, and these are the hazardous chemicals that have SDS, the threshold is about 10,000 pounds, and that's on site at any given time. And so 10,000 pounds, what does that look like visually? All right, so if you've got 22 to 25, 55 gallon drums of a hazardous hazmat at your site, then you're looking at probably about 10,000 pounds of that. You have to look at the specific gravity and you need to do the measurements yourself. But 22 to 25, 55 gallon drums are 4 to 5, 275 gallon totes. If you've got about that amount, then you're hitting about around that 10,000 pound threshold, and you need to start looking into, do I need to be doing tier 2 reporting? Now, note that I say for most chemicals. This does not include extremely hazardous substances or EHSs. So those might be things like chlorine or anhydrous ammonia or hydrofluoric acid. So if you've got anything that's classified as an extremely hazardous substance, they have much lower reporting thresholds, like 100 pounds or 500 pounds. Some of them even have like a 10-pound threshold. And so EHSs have lower reporting thresholds that you can look up. And also gasoline and diesel fuel that's sold at retail gas stations. They have different reporting thresholds, like 75,000 gallons or 100,000 gallons. But for most chemicals, it's that 10,000 pounds that we're looking at. Now, this report is due by March 1st each year, and you have to report it to the state. You have to send a report to your LEPC, so your county emergency management agency. And you also have to report it to the local fire department that has authority to respond to your facility. So there's 3 reports that must be submitted. The contents of that report include the chemical name or the common name, the physical and health hazards associated with the chemical, the estimated maximum amount that could be on site at any given time at a site. So what's representative is the way that you need to think about that, what's usually there, the average daily amount that is present, the general location within the facility of where it's located, and then contact information for a representative that's knowledgeable about the location, the types of chemicals at that facility. It's a pretty simple report. You may even include the container types that they're located in. Now, it's not just that you submit those reports through email. You need to have documentation that those reports were submitted. You need to have a confirmation document that says those entities received that report. This was shared with me by Beth Woodfin, who runs the program for the state of Alabama for the Department of Environmental Management. She says it's really important that facilities understand they have to have documentation that those reports were submitted and received. That's kind of it on tier 2 reporting. Before I move on, does anybody have any questions about tier 2 reports? Actually, I do have another statement, but before I kind of get ahead of myself.
You see a lot of non-compliance that like people just don't know.
A lot of non-compliance, and a lot of it are just items missed. Sometimes facilities submit a tier 2 report for certain things, but they don't submit it for everything there at the site that they should be. And so a lot of times there are things like batteries, lead acid batteries on forklifts. If you have a bunch of those at a site, that adds up fast. And then sulfuric acid, is an EHS, so some of that has lower reporting thresholds. Things like plastic resin. Why would plastic resin have to be reported? Why is that a hazardous chemical? There's nothing wrong with that stuff, right?
Isocyanate?
It's even simpler than that.
Flammable.
Because of dust. Combustible dust is the main reason. And so anything that has an SDS sheet is on there, and if you look at some of that PVC, it all has a combustible dust hazard. And so a lot of times, not all products do, so certain products do, certain don't. But there are a lot of just commonly missed items. Other scenarios are, and this is where I get back to the chemical inventory. Folks just don't have an accurate inventory of what they have on site. So they don't know if they got 10,000 pounds of it on site or not. They know they got several drums of it over here or over there, but they don't know how much is there. And that's the issue with keeping an inventory. It's not just here's the product and here's where the product is. You need to start collecting. Here's the product, here's where it is, here's how much we got on site. And that needs to be updated regularly. You need to start tracking usage amounts.
Ronald Turner says road salt and propane. Guessing.
Propane, yeah, absolutely right. Propane is a huge one that's missed. Yeah, there's a list of them that folks just are missing and not putting in the report, but I see it missed often. It's a very common part of my environmental compliance review report to facilities. All right, so that was the hazardous chemical inventory tier 2 report. That's just one area of reporting. Another one is the toxics release inventory, or TRI. And so the TRI Form R reporting is another area. Now, there are specific industry sectors that have to do this, and you can look up your NAICS code to figure out if you're one of those industry sectors that are required to submit a TRI Form R report. You need to have more than 10 employees, and you need to create, process, or use a hazardous chemical. Now, what does that mean, create, process, or use? Because it doesn't necessarily mean what you think it might mean. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Now, if you are required to do TRI Form R reporting and you meet reporting thresholds, that report is due every year by July 1st. All right, so here are the reporting thresholds for TRI Form R. So toxic chemicals manufactured or processed. So if you manufacture or process a chemical at your site, the threshold is 25,000 pounds annually. Now, to manufacture a chemical, that typically means that you're creating a chemical at your site, right? And so that either means you're creating it as a final product or it's just a byproduct. It's not necessarily you're there to make that chemical. It's a byproduct of some reaction that you're doing at your site. And so those are kind of what it means by manufacturing. And then processed, that means a lot of things. Process could mean that you're just repackaging it. You're moving it from a large container to a small container. That is processing. And so that is one, and I've got an example of that later that kind of trips folks up sometimes. The other one is chemicals otherwise used, and the threshold for chemicals otherwise used is 10,000 pounds annually. And so what does that mean? What do you think is a chemical that's otherwise used?
Oils or lubricants?
It could be lubricants. Think about things like solvents or cleaning products where you're not using it as part of your process, but it's there maybe to treat a metal surface before you paint it or something like that. So think about xylene and treating a metal surface. Lots of things like that. So you're not using it as part of the process, but you are otherwise using it at your site, and you're wasting it in some way, shape, or fashion, or you're recycling it, or you're sending it off for treatment, or it's emitted through a water discharge. And so that's what otherwise used means. And then there are also special lower thresholds for PBT or persistent bioaccumulative and toxic substances. They have a much lower reporting threshold if you manufacture, process, or otherwise use those types of chemicals. All right, and so what the toxics release inventory is interested in are releases and waste management reporting. So it wants to know, it doesn't just want to know how much of it you got on site. It wants to know how you release, how it was released from your facility. How much of it was released as air emissions? How much of it went to the landfill? How much of it was released in a water discharge from your facility? How much of it are you recycling, or how much of it are you treating on site? So it wants to know exactly what's happening with these chemicals at your site. So that gets a lot more complex, right? You gotta have a lot more detailed information about these chemical products in order to complete this report. Also, this report, the federal EPA's who's going to come in and visit your site to see if you're reporting or if you've messed up on a report. And so I know of a company that we got called in to help that they just misreported, and it was like a $50,000 fine because of misreporting, and they got an audit from the EPA, and they got a pretty stiff fine and a violation just from not reporting something correctly that they should have been. So these can be costly. And so there was a company that we went to, had a lot of stuff they were doing just fine, but they had never filed a TRI Form R report because they didn't know they were supposed to. And they were just repackaging. They were basically getting large shipments of product in, and they were pouring it into smaller containers and reboxing it and then shipping it off. And they didn't see that as creating, processing, or otherwise using, you know, any of those chemicals. But it very much is that. And so, you know, there are different ways that you can kind of miss doing those reports. And not necessarily that you're mismanaging anything. It's just the fact that you're not reporting it in accordance with federal regulations and guidelines. So in summary, HAZCOM is, for whatever reason, you know, it's up there on that top list of OSHA violations. Chemical inventory management not only is a part of that HAZCOM program, but it also is a requirement to have, just so that you understand what are other reporting requirements that I'm missing that I'm not doing at my site. And so keeping that accurate chemical inventory and having a good system in place is crucial for that. And you need to track the type and the quantity of those products used. And so that's that in a nutshell. Yeah, and I'm happy to take any questions. And I do have a shameless plug for training we got coming up.
Plug away.
Actually, I have to stand up to get the dates. I didn't create a slide for it. And we can share these flyers with anybody who's interested. But we have next week, October 22nd, 23rd, we have an ISO 14001 environmental management practices course where we teach on how to do an internal audit at your facility for one day. And then the second day, we do a whole bunch of sections on environmental compliance. So we go through RCRA and air permitting and water permitting and kind of talk about that from managing it from an ISO 14001 lens. Then on November 7th, we have a HazWalker 8-hour refresher class. And this also acts as awareness and operations level that's going to be offered. And then November 19th and 20th, we have a new course that's sampling fundamentals for industrial hygiene. And so that's just industrial hygiene technician sampling. And that's a 2-day course where we just talk about the types of instrumentation that you use when you do that. And then just some procedures that you use for sampling and methods. So that's all I got.
Any questions online?
So employers here in Alabama could request somebody on your staff to come out do an assessment for environmental, like safety and health.
Yeah, but our environmental, so we've got 2 different types of kind of broad level reviews that we do. One is an environmental compliance review where we look at environmental aspects, and that's a fee-based service. So we would enter into a professional service agreement to do that. And that's a confidential service that we offer and a confidential report that's provided to you with recommendations and identification of gaps. Then the other one that we do is called a pollution prevention survey. And that's where we can come into a facility free of charge and we can review energy efficiency improvements, water use, chemical use. And we provide a detailed report on recommendations that help you to reduce waste and save money. And so it could be energy efficiency improvements, it could be water efficiency improvements, chemical use management and that sort of thing. And that's covered and that's confidential as well, other than we do report to the EPA because it's grant funded, any recommendations that we make, but we don't even report facility identifiers other than a NAICS code. And so they would know that we did something in the dairy manufacturing sector, but they wouldn't know any facility information. Everything's completely delisted that's reported. So those are kind of two, and what we do, you know, kind of some industrial hygiene sampling and different types of sampling for like mold, indoor air quality assessments and different things like that. All right.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I have to apologize. We usually have a little gift that we give. If Tom had been here, we would have had two of them, but since Tom wasn't here, I forgot mine. So we didn't have that.
Well,
Thank you.
I'll take a hearty handshake.
Okay.
Next time you come, we'll get your
Yeah.
exclusive cup.
All right. Yeah, Matt brought me a coffee cup, so I'm good. I got the ASSP coffee mug.
That's all right.
It's good, yeah.
Okay.
Take care of it.
We changed over. Notice.
Can't even spell October correctly.
We were fine till you said that.
Special group is this. All right, well, thank you for everybody who participated. It was a great presentation. I don't know anything about chemicals, not my line at all, but that was pretty fascinating. So before we move on, let's go ahead and stand and we'll do the pledge. We don't have a live flag here today, but we have the one here on the screen. I'll start us off. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have any volunteers for offering a word of prayer? I'll do it. Our Father in heaven, we are very grateful to be here today on this beautiful day. We're grateful for the presentation that Michael gave. We're grateful for the opportunity that we have as safety professionals to help protect those around us. We pray that we will each be given light and knowledge that will understand those things that we can do that will serve the people with whom we work in our community, that will be able to help people go home in the same manner that they got to work, avoiding any type of injury or illness. We're grateful for the freedoms that we enjoy in this country, for the great jobs that we have, for the ability that we have to assist those around us. We thank you for all our many blessings. We're grateful for this food. We pray that thou art blessed, that it will be nourishing to us. We pray for these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
All right, we have ham on white, turkey on wheat, and a couple of either tuna or chicken sandwich.
I don't think it's gonna take long, so my recommendation is why don't we just go ahead and go through this real
Okay.
quick? We can pretty much just break on.
We have any new members in here? We don't. Unless somebody was online that was new, but I didn't recognize anybody new online. We can't spell announcements correct either. You have to get a new secretary here. We have any announcements? Anything?
Gotta. Okay. I had something. We got a few things that Tom. And I think those may be similar. Are those kind of things that Michael was talking about? No.
No, but I think these were all in the newsletter, were they not?
No,
We've seen the golf tournament thing.
we'll include this in the we'll include this in the newsletter and the information going, it'll be available. So, this is good announcements for UA Safe State and the other meetings that we got coming up.
Wonderful.
15th, common ergo issues in industry for next month.
I know that we had a couple listed on the newsletter. I think these were the ones that were listed on the newsletter, I believe. Were they? I just
Recognize any of them.
I looked at the newsletter a little bit earlier. Anyways, we've got some other training opportunities coming up. The OSHA 511 is always good to go through if you have somebody in your company who needs that. OSHA 2045 over machine guarding, and that's available in Tuscaloosa.
This was something that we just recently found out about it. We were aware of it, and AIHA asked us to send out a notice, and I told them I would also mention it here. Upcoming fall conference that they're putting on, a little more than half day. It'll include lunch. If you have not gotten it from the announcements, please let me know and I can send the information out to you. We got some interest in, and did anybody here familiar with home safety? Had something to do with mining industry. Apparently, this was an organization that was in place for a while, having to do with the mining industry. Jerry Lee is recommending that we put some effort into getting it going again. It's more in mining, so we haven't made a push.
Yeah, we don't have Danny here.
Haven't made a push from the ASSP so much. I mean, we do have mining folks, but there's separate organizations that do that. So if you want to speak to Jerry about it, please let me know and I can, if everybody's online, let me know and I can send you the information. Here's the contact information and maybe make an organizational push to get that organization going. He's really interested in doing that. He thought it's important.
All right. Back here, same bad channel, same bad place in November.
Let's spell check.
With spell check.
We'll spell check.
Either that or we're gonna cut Vincent's pay.
Brought it up. I'm just saying.
I don't understand why PowerPoint will do it automatically and all the other, everything else does.
F7.
How lazy we've gotten.
And I guess we'll sign off on the Zoom meeting. All right, thank you, everybody, for attending.